So if you're anything like me, you spend a lot of time on Twitter on the hashtag D&D and hashtag TTRPG. They're really, really cool communities, and you can see a lot of really awesome stuff in there. But the longer you're there, the more you'll start to notice that there's really only 4 tweets. Also, if you didn't notice it before, you will now. First one is someone talking about something that happened in a game they just played, or something that's going to happen in a game they're going to play. Just general enthusiasm for the hobby. I love those tweets. I like seeing people who are excited about a thing I like. Tell me about it, Dark Lord 420 Blaze Bomb. What are you gonna do to them, kobolds? The next kind of tweet is a content creator blast tweet. This will be something like, hey, I made this rule supplement. I made this art, or look at my cool OC, or look at these characters from Critical Role. Those are really nice because it's inspiring to see how broad and diverse the community really is, especially in the context of artwork. I mean, you don't think about it too often, but it's kind of wild that Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role-playing games can inspire so many creative people to create genuine, awesome works of art. The third kind of tweet you'll see are rhetorical questions that are rhetorical. They're questions that are meant to kind of gauge the community in a way that seems useful in some instances, but might necessarily not be. Oftentimes it's used to just kind of spark a discussion. What's the best way to tell your DM you are in love with an NPC? Do you guys read the Dungeon Master's Guide? It's the Dungeon Master's Guide. I call it the Player's Guide. Why are dragons hot? I like hats. The interesting thing about these questions is that they aren't really seeking answers. They're kind of acting just like a gathering place where members of the community can come in and just drop something in the comments and scurry off. Usually something goofy, like this guy does. What a goof. The last kind of tweet, person providing unsolicited advice to dungeon masters or players, usually by calling it as such. Unsolicited DM advice, have fun. A lot of these are very high level. This is a general guideline that maybe you should try to adhere to. The other way that the unsolicited DM advice goes is someone actually calling attention to a specific issue with representation or gatekeeping that's taking place within the TTRPG or D&D space. These are important as well, and as a dungeon master, I look at those as taking vitamins. I need to be aware of what are the political and social and identity ramifications of the way that I run the game at my table. They often devolve into horrible Twitter shouting matches because it's still Twitter. This variety is very consistent. So when you're scrolling through, you can see the variety, and it actually, like, in a weird way, kind of energizes you. I'm going to see someone be really excited about their campaign coming up, and then I'm going to get to see a super cool drawing of a tiefling that someone made, and then a few scrolls down, oh snap, Sly Flourish has some hot take that I need to figure out how to make actionable. It just goes on from there, and it just keeps going back and forth. And the variety actually makes the entire community seem cool and vibrant and interesting, even though it is just these basically tweeting styles. Like, if I had to deal with just one of those the entire time, I'd probably get very upset and bored, and I'd want to leave and never come back. So now I'm going to talk about initiative systems. I'm pressing buttons on a laptop. I'm not just looking down at my lap. Can you see the laptop? I don't know. Initiative systems are a thing that come up a lot when people discuss Dungeons and Dragons. It's sort of like an evergreen topic. If you want to make some kind of content about D&D, a really easy thing to focus on is an initiative system. Hi! Now, in Dungeons and Dragons, the way that we indicate initiative is the dungeon master will say, you walk into a room and there's a bear in there. And then you go, is the bear sleeping? And they go, no! Roll for initiative. This is kind of variable amongst different tables or different systems, but the term roll for initiative is sort of ingrained in the cultural consciousness of people who play role-playing games, that a roll for initiative is the start of a situation where it's important that you take turns, and also usually combat. It's the thing that you do in order to determine the turn order. What's great about the roll for initiative as a concept is it does a couple of things. One, it implies that you are in a situation where initiative is important, which means that initiative is something that exists on its own, absent of a system. Two, roll for initiative indicates that someone has created a system in order to deal with the first thing. And three, because people say roll for initiative, they don't know to separate those ideas, which means that when people talk about initiative and figure out ways to improve it, they talk about it wrong. So I'm going to fix it. And by the end of this, you are going to know why it's important to understand initiative as a concept, the 4 major types of initiative systems, because there's only 4, and you're going to have a framework to create those 4 systems for yourself, as well as when to employ them. That's right. I'm going to learn you something. Nah. And I'm going to do so through a list. I don't know if I said that. I think I did. I think I said that. Come here, Bowser. I want you over here right now. He's a dragon. Part 1, capital I. The one thing that most people get confused about initiative, especially in role-playing games, and super especially in D&D, is that initiative is a mode of play. Most, if not all, tabletop role-playing games have situations that we would describe as it meets the criteria for calling for initiative. What are those criteria, you might ask? There's only 3. 1, it's a situation where the players, the characters, or something they care about is in imminent danger. So basically, that could mean that there's a monster in the room. It could also mean that a big boulder is about to fall down on a baby. I don't know why that's where my head went. I think I like the alliteration. It could also mean a giant squid man is about to eat poisoned... What do squids eat? I want to say pellets. Do squids eat pellets? They don't eat pellets. They're not pets. Or are they? Basically, something's in danger. The characters, something they like, whatever. The danger is kind of a nebulous concept, but it's easy to identify what the danger is. 2, the thing that is threatening the player characters or the thing they care about is going to actually act on that threat if it is not stopped. And this is very important. If there is a bomb that's not going to go off, it's really weird to say that that's a threat to you. I mean, yes, it's threatening on its own, I guess, but it's not an immediate danger, and you could probably deal with it without calling for initiative. Basically, there is something in the game world that's going to commit this harm unless the players do something to mitigate it. 3, the thing that's doing the threatening, it needs to be able to act in the next few in-game moments. It's threatening something the players care about, but it's not going to be able to do so for like 6 in-game months. It'd be really strange to roll initiative, huh? Wouldn't it? You don't need to take turns yet. Time is not really a factor. And that's really what it comes down to, right? The reason why you roll for initiative is you want your players to be paying very close attention to what is happening at a very specific point in time, usually about a minute or so. You got to remember that in the baseline rules of Dungeons & Dragons, combat, which is a huge part of Dungeons & Dragons, it takes place over 6-second rounds, meaning that a 10-round combat scenario is 1 minute of in-game time. Also, when you take your turn lasts 6 seconds. So if you take 4 turns and you cast a spell and blow someone up and stab somebody, that was like less than a minute that you did all those things. Like, your characters are basically... Do you ever think that your characters are superheroes? Because they basically are, just based on turn structure. But those are the things, right? That's how I argue this. Those are the things. Any situation in any role-playing game that meets those 3 criteria is fair game for calling initiative. But calling for initiative and an initiative system are different things. You can honestly achieve the goal of calling for initiative by telling your players, hey, listen, you're going to die if you don't make good choices here. You know, like the Navi. Not that Navi. There we go. It's a ball with wings that talks to Link. I'm a gamer. You could tell by my shirt and glasses. Initiative systems are ways that dungeon masters have iterated on the concept of initiative in order to better convey it to players and also to achieve certain outcomes. And they do so to varying levels of efficiency. Initiative as a mode of play is something that you really cannot separate from Dungeons & Dragons, or any role-playing game, honestly, because it's just when you're playing the game, the players need to know, You need to make good choices or you're going to die. Can you guys see my feet? I certainly hope not. I'm not wearing shoes. I have gross feet. I'll put my feet down now. I'm nervous. So when you play a role-playing game that has initiative as a mode, you as a dungeon master or game master or whatever have to think of a way to handle that. And in most role-playing games, they'll give you one way to handle that. And that's not enough. 2! Systems overview. Why did I put my arms out? When people talk about initiative systems, the problems are pretty much the same across the board. The system takes too long to employ. The system requires a lot of bookkeeping and overhead. Certain characters are unfairly favored because of the way initiative works. Also, it's relatively boring because turn order is fixed, or it's unfixed in a way that you don't have to pay attention to the game anymore. So when people talk about initiative systems, they try to frame it like this. What up, D&D gamers? It's me, CD Dragon Boy. Like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell. I'm here to tell you about the hottest new initiative system that makes the initiative system that comes with D&D look like a big old pile of dog poopy. Be sure to check out my Patreon and follow me on TikTokstagram. It's still me. I was wearing a mask. The basic way that people discuss initiative systems when they discuss initiative systems is a grass is greener sort of argument. They basically say that the current initiative system with whatever game you're playing has these problems, and the way to solve it is to switch to another system that forgoes those specific problems. I'm here to tell you that that way of thinking is fundamentally flawed. This is going to basically be the iron triangle of initiative systems. It's not the best critical thinking tool for how to understand initiative, but for our purposes, it's fine. Imagine a triangle. Each point of the triangle has a quality that we would ascribe to a really good initiative system. It's equitable, meaning that every character and monster has an equal chance to show up somewhere in the turn order, either towards the top or bottom. It is dynamic, meaning that round to round, the turn order is unfixed. This is important for a couple of reasons. It prevents players from getting bored by the turn order, and 2, it allows players to better coordinate when they take certain actions or set up special combos. If a wizard always goes 5 players after a rogue, there's not a lot of room for the rogue and the wizard to work together to create a kind of synergy. Like, the rogue can't stab someone and grab them and then the wizard casts a spell. Too many turns happen in between that to allow such a plan to take place. This is a very general example, but it's the kind of example that you would bring up when you want to say why dynamic initiative is positive. The final quality of a good initiative system is that it requires little to no overhead. Basically, it's a system where you don't have to track anything. And that's good. You really want a system that doesn't require a lot of overhead because combat in role-playing games can take a really, really long time. The more players you have, the more time it takes to do initiative, the more time it takes to resolve combat. So any way that you can shrink down the time is a benefit. Initiative systems being easy to track is one such way to do that. Those are our qualities. You're not going to have a system that can do all of these. You're just not. You can't. No. Every system that you can put forth is going to meet a few of these criteria, but not all of them. And the reason why is the qualities that go into making a good initiative system are relatively fixed. Every one of those qualities has a time or administrative burden associated with it, or they affect the equity of the game in such a way that some players might find negative and some might find positive. You can't win. I'm sorry. The grass will always be greener. But this actually is good. And the reason why it's good is because once you accept that every initiative system has flaws, you can actually start seeing why certain initiative systems would be better than others. Now, I'm going to talk about that at the end, but I think it would be good if we talked about all the different kinds of initiative systems, which, like I said, there are 4 total. And I'm going to show this Punnett square. It's a square. It's Punnett square. Punnett was a guy who made a square that helped show what happens when peas do it. It's biology, so it's not gross. I'm going to say this is part 3. If it's not part 3, it is now. So there are 4 basic initiative systems that you can utilize. And I'm not going to spend too much time explaining any one of them, and I would not call this a how-to guide. So let's get into it. Initiative System 1. That's right, listen to list. Initiative System 1 is Standard Initiative. This is the initiative system that comes with the Dungeons & Dragons box. Box? Does it come in? It comes in a box. This is a style of initiative that most people would understand, even if they've never played Dungeons & Dragons before. Everyone rolls a d20, they add their initiative modifier, the highest goes first, and then it goes in descending order until everyone's gone, and then it resets back to the top of the order. Very simple. It took me like 4 takes to explain that because I've actually never had to explain Standard Initiative before, because it's really obvious how it's supposed to work. This initiative system, honestly, this is the one that most people complain about. Standard Initiative is actually a pretty versatile system, and if you put it on our Punnett square, it would be up here on the top right, where it's a relatively equitable system. It doesn't have a ton of overhead, and it's very easy to understand. The players roll once, turn order is determined, and then you just kind of mark down what the turn order is, and that's it. That's all the bookkeeping you have to do. People have a lot of creative ways of tracking initiative also. Like, this is an initiative tracker I made. You put the names of the players on clothespins. I screwed up because I wrote it in permanent marker for this video, but this is what they can look like. It looks like butts is going to go before butts. I don't know if you can see it. I also don't know if that screwed up the focus. I can't see the camera because it's my phone. I got the styrofoam on my pants now. The problem with the system is it's not very dynamic in the sense that once you have the turn order set, it really cannot change. In Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, the turn order is determined at the start of combat and remains that way to the end, and the only way that you can move up or down in the turn order is if the person ahead of you dies. It's not interesting round to round. You just know what's going to happen. All you really need to know is what the person before you did and then who's near you. Some people say that it's unrealistic. It's Dungeons & Dragons. Get over yourself. 2. Dynamic Initiative. This is a system which is characterized by the idea that the turn order is unfixed. It's somewhere here. This was top right, bottom left. A good example of this system is Popcorn by the Angry GM, and I will put a link to that in the description. The basic way that system works is you roll for initiative like normal, and then the highest person goes first, and then that person chooses who goes next. They can choose another player, or they can choose a monster. And the reason why they do that is to keep the game interesting. But also, and this is the cool part, it allows you to set up some pretty awesome, like Avengers style combos. The rogue stabs something, and then the fighter grabs the stab thing, and then the cleric hits it with like a smiting bolt. Is that a thing? I never play clerics, so I don't know. It allows basically for really diverse combat situations because there's going to be very much a situation where the player's like, pick me, or the dungeon master's like, oh, come on, pick me, I want to make a monster hit you in the face. Which they'll never pick the dungeon master, which is the problem with this system. Dynamic initiative systems are very easy to make completely inequitable. Either the system is inequitable in the sense that players are really only going to want to pick other players if they're trying to win, and similar to dungeon masters could very easily pick just monsters. So you would have to iterate on that in order to make sure that didn't occur. Or, trade-off, you have the turn order be unfixed and dynamic, but you base it around something that creates randomness. Randomness is good because it creates equality, but randomness is bad because it doesn't necessarily create equity. Equity is a matter of outcomes, meaning that when you're done with combat, you felt like your position in the turn order was earned fairly. That might not be the case if you do a fully randomized dynamic initiative system, which is something that happens, I think, in Savage Worlds. I want to say they use cards. 3, time-bound. I made that term up. I actually don't know what this kind of initiative system is called, so I'm calling it time-bound. Time-based? Time-bound initiative systems are ones that try their best to emulate reality. I see you, people who care about realism. They're initiative systems that are based around the idea that the actions you take in combat are what should actually determine when those actions happen, because certain actions take longer than others. The Dungeon Master's Guide actually contains a specific example of a time-bound initiative system, which they call Speed Factor Initiative. Characters don't necessarily roll for initiative at the start of combat. Instead, each character and monster declares what it is they're going to do at a very high level. I'm going to strike somebody, I'm going to cast a spell, whatever. The things that they say they're going to do change their initiative modifier, either increasing it or decreasing it based on the complexity. Then the character's size affects it. Gargantuan monsters are inherently slower than tiny monsters, so you get a bonus or a penalty depending on your size. Once you have all those modifiers together, you roll a d20, and then whoever rolls highest acts first. This sounds kind of like an iteration on standard initiative, which it is, but the reason why it's time-bound is, as a player, you have a great deal of control as to where you show up in the turn order, and the turn order is completely unfixed. You might do the exact same thing from one turn to the next, and you could be in completely different places in the turn order, which is exciting. Also, the things that you declare are very general, meaning that you don't have to say, I'm going to attack this goblin. You can just say, I'm going to attack something, which is really, really exciting because it also doesn't preclude those awesome Avengers-style combo attacks. I keep saying Avengers-style. I would say Overwatch-style, but Overwatch 2 isn't coming out, and Blizzard's bad now. Time-bound initiative systems are the most dynamic and arguably the most equitable because the players, by definition, have to be in perfect control over what it is they're going to be doing turn by turn. And obviously the problem is they require a ton of overhead. You have to track a lot of things. Your initiative modifier is going to change every single round if you're using the speed factor initiative that comes with the Dungeon Master's Guide. So there's a trade-off. And of course, the fourth kind of initiative, GM Fiat. Fiat initiative is the Dungeon Master decides. This is an initiative system that will show up in a game like Dungeon World or Powered by the Apocalypse. And it's a system characterized by not really being an initiative system. This goes back to what I was saying at the start. Initiative is a mode of play, but that mode of play doesn't necessarily imply that a system is needed. Really, it's just that your characters need to be aware that their choices matter a lot more at this very moment for a very specific reason. So with a GM Fiat initiative, the Dungeon Master might just say, you're in danger. What do you do? And then the players will say what they do. The Dungeon Master might pay attention to turns, or they might not. They might have a turn order in their head, or they might not. They might just be listening to who speaks up first or who doesn't. This system requires essentially zero overhead because this system doesn't really add anything that isn't in the game inherently. The problem, obviously, is that there are no checks in place to ensure that it's equitable or dynamic. It might be, it might not. You don't know. It shows up here at the bottom. Not equitable, not dynamic, not a system. No overhead though, so at least there's that. So those are the four system types. And if you've been exploring the hobby a little bit, you should already have in your head what some of these systems might actually be, like specific examples. I provided a couple, but there are tons out there. There are way more variations on these systems than I can get into, but these are the four archetypes. I mean, I tried really hard to find more than this. This is all I got. I don't know if this subject has been explored very much. Maybe it has. If it has, it's been explored bad because all the videos I found were pretty much like the dragon guy. I forgot his name already. Four! Every initiative system is good some of the time, but no initiative system is good all of the time. And it's up to you as a dungeon master to figure out what that is. I'm going to give you my perspective on when certain systems are useful and when they aren't. You don't necessarily have to follow that if you understand what the systems are for, what they allow, and what their drawbacks are. Let's start with the basic one, standard initiative. Standard initiative is useful in the sense that it is quick to understand, it's quick to set up, it's quick to resolve. It's one dice roll, one turn order, and you're off and running. And the thing to remember about Dungeons & Dragons style combat, which is the game that I play, is that you don't really need a very elaborate initiative system for most combat encounters, because in Dungeons & Dragons, combat is so quick and so deadly, especially in the first few encounters in an adventuring day, a standard style initiative system is actually perfectly viable. If a combat scenario isn't going to take longer than, say, 5 rounds, there's no particular reason not to use standard initiative. The one caveat I would make to this is if the characters are fighting against a slightly larger party than themselves. In other words, it's 4 party members and say 5, I don't know, hydras. 5 hydras? That's a sticky situation because every hydra head gets its own turn. Also, standard initiative is really good for conveying a scenario where there is a threat to the players that is acting at a specific time every round, and what the players do doesn't affect it. A good example of this is, say, an avalanche coming down a mountain, or a bomb ticking down about to go off. If you notice, in a lot of big boss fights, they introduce the concept of a layer action that acts on turn count 20. This is why, because it gives you a sense of menace towards the environment. So that's standard initiative. When do you want to use a dynamic initiative system? Dynamic initiative is really good at emphasizing a disproportionate number of monsters or players. So it works really well in situations where players are in an ambush. If a bunch of players manage to get the drop on a bunch of sleeping gnolls, Slimes are cute though. A bunch of sleeping enemies. Using dynamic initiative is a great way to emphasize that the players got the drop on these monsters. Similarly, if the players walk themselves into like a canyon and there's a bunch of like bandits on the sides and they're shooting arrows down, it makes sense to use a dynamic initiative system then to emphasize, hey, you were ambushed. Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition has rules for the surprise round. I don't actually like that very much because it implies that combat becomes very like normal after you've been ambushed, which I don't want that. I want an ambush to feel like a really big deal, and having the initiative system be different because of that helps emphasize that. But also, and this is the cool part, there's no particular reason why you can't change the initiative system mid-combat. So you would want to use the dynamic initiative system after a couple of rounds of standard initiative. You switch over to dynamic in order to emphasize that the fight has become very desperate and very chaotic, and that the players need to be paying way more attention and trying to find ways to get out of this dangerous situation, which is really exciting because it gives every battle a sort of a narrative arc where it starts off really clean and gets really messy. I know that sounds cool, right? I want to do that. Sounds really great. When to use time-bound initiative. Time-bound initiative is really strategic and has a lot of overhead. One of the biggest problems with Dungeons & Dragons, and maybe a lot of games, I don't know. I know with 5e it works this way, but your big epic monster can be killed in maybe 1 or 2 rounds. That's okay if that's the kind of player experience you want to go for. But if you want to create a fight where the players feel like they're outclassed by the thing they're fighting, time-bound initiative does that, mostly because it makes everything much slower. I know that sounds really weird, but it's true. You can have a single monster fight a group of party members, or a single monster duel someone and make it actually feel like a challenge. Like maybe the fighter has picked a fight with Strahd one-on-one. You know, he's like, I hate incels. Come at me, Strahd lovers! This also allows you to ramp up the difficulty of that single monster because you can grant them more turns based on the actions they take. Maybe they choose to take 3 attacks in a given round. If the monster can make 3 or 4 attacks on its turn, even if it rolled really bad initiative, players are going to have to think very strategically. Do I want to cast a really big spell that's going to take a long time? Do I want to dive out of the way and try to attack with a dagger because I might get it off first? Maybe their goal is to act first before a player who acts later in order to kind of like defend them and protect them so they can drop a big nuke on the monster, because the monster is going to take a couple of actions and those actions might kill somebody. And hey, that's it. That's the framework that I personally use. Standard initiative for combat under 5 rounds. Dynamic initiative if the combat goes beyond 5 rounds or if I want to emphasize chaos. And time-bound initiative if they're going to be fighting like a boss monster or something. And then, of course, there's GM Fiat, which I just use when I'm too lazy to use the other ones. I think this would be part 5. I'm recording it at a different time because I've been editing, and I have some final thoughts. One of the things I realized about what I'm describing is that the iron triangle and the Punnett square, you could easily nitpick those apart as not the best tools to figure out all the nuances of initiative systems, and I accept that. They're not great, but my goal is to try to make this concept easy to understand. Really, the thing to take away is that every initiative system has 2 qualities. It can be more or less dynamic, and it can be more or less equitable. And the trend seems to be the more equitable and the more dynamic a system is, the more bookkeeping it requires. Ooh, this is heavy. I'm holding my phone in like a little rig. The other thing to bring up is that and I'm sure that a lot of people are getting ready for this, a lot of the overhead for an initiative system can be taken care of by automation, by the use of electronic tools like D&D Beyond or 5e tools or something like that. I didn't bring that up, mostly because I don't think a system should require an extra tool in order to work with a role-playing game, because with a tabletop role-playing game, the only things you need are the ability to have a conversation and dice. And honestly, I think the dice are optional most of the time. So to say that you absolutely need an extra tool to track initiative is kind of a weird thing to do. And this is something that I'm not really qualified to explain further, but some people just can't access those tools for whatever reason. And if they can't use it, then telling them to just use this tool to make initiative easier isn't advice or helpful. And I guess the only other thing is, for those of you who are making an argument for using automated tools or think that automated tools would kind of flatten out the difference, just for the sake of argument, that still wouldn't change that no single initiative system works for every situation. You can't have one system that does everything. And if you need more proof of that, look to the fact that we live in a world where we have Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder. So that's the video. I hope you liked it. I don't know if you did. It's probably very long. This is like the third time I've recorded it. I actually don't know if the recording finished. I'm recording this on my phone. I can't see it. Maybe the microphone shut off. I don't know. Thank you for watching. Bye.